Ethiopia's maritime deal with a breakaway region of Somalia is leading to tension between Mogadishu and Addis Ababa. It would give the landlocked country access to a stretch of coastline under a 50-year lease agreement. Now, along with that issue, let's talk to the Sahan Research Strategic Advisor, Matt Bryden. Matt, a very good evening to you. Good to have your time. You're joining us, I believe, from Nairobi, Kenya tonight. Let's talk about why the Somalis are so upset about this and the context around the issues to do with Somalia and Somaliland, who has now gone into this agreement with the Ethiopians.
Well, there are a number of reasons that the deal between Ethiopia and Somaliland is being taken so badly in Somalia. One is, of course, that what Ethiopia is offering in exchange for naval base and possibly commercial access to the Red Sea is recognition of Somaliland as an independent and sovereign state. Now, this would mean the end of Somalia, the Somali Republic, as we know it. And so for many in Somalia and for the Somali federal government, this is, of course, a red line. It's the breakup of an African state that's existed since 1960, or did between 1960 and 1991. Now, another reason that Somalia is so incensed by this is that Ethiopia has made this deal with Somaliland without consulting the federal government in Mogadishu. For the federal government, this is further indication that Ethiopia has already decided to work with Somaliland as a sovereign entity, and to its relations with Somalia proper, as a result, have been deteriorating to possibly their worst point in decades. And that for Mogadishu, this is also a sign that, as they say, Ethiopia is now an aggressor. It's now trying to undermine Somalia's unity and territorial integrity. And a third complaint that Mogadishu has, or the government has in Mogadishu, is that Ethiopia is seeking a naval base on the Red Sea, and Mogadishu is characterizing this as annexation of Somali territory, whereas the deal between Somaliland and Ethiopia presents this as a concession, as a lease of up to 50 years. We haven't seen the details, but not an annexation at all, more or less a conventional arrangement for the foreign basing rights for military forces. Now, there's a whole other side to this story, which is the Ethiopia-Somaliland side, but these are the reasons that Mogadishu is very upset about this Ethiopian-Somaliland MOU.
What would it change, though, Matt, on the ground when you consider that Somaliland, as far back as the early 90s, had unilaterally declared independence and wants little to nothing, in fact, to do with the main government in Somalia?
Well, exactly. It's a really good question, because Somaliland declared independence from Somalia in 1991 when the then government of General Mohammed Siad Barre collapsed, and Somalia effectively became stateless. It had no governing institutions for at least the next decade. Some would say even longer, until around 2004. So Somaliland really existed in a vacuum. It declared its independence, but there was no government in Mogadishu to declare independence from. And since then, Somaliland has evolved as a functional government of its own, with control over almost all of its territory. It has not only a government, but it has an army, police, of course, its own currency, a passport that's increasingly widely accepted in a number of countries, and it functions as an independent country. So for Somaliland, the idea that Somalia has recently sort of restored its government and is now saying we want Somaliland back, this is problematic. Mm-hmm. And it's even more so because the government in Mogadishu really doesn't control much of its own territory at all, let alone Somaliland. The government is confined practically to Mogadishu and its environs, although it it does have relations with the regional administrations in other parts of Somalia, and it is recognized as the legitimate and sovereign entity controlling Somali territory.
Let's talk about what the Somali president has been saying then, because just recently he was basically telling people in Somalia to prepare a defense or to defend the country in some way. But what would that mean? Is that a threat to war?
No, it's not really, because Somalia doesn't have much of an army, and the forces that it has are currently committed to fighting the Islamist extremist group Al-Shabaab, and they're not doing that very effectively either. So the idea that Somalia could actually send forces to fight Somaliland is frankly ludicrous. Somalia also has an air force and a navy in name only. Neither one could realistically project force to Somaliland. So I don't think war is a possibility. What the president of Somalia is doing is appealing to political groups and minorities in Somaliland who may feel aggrieved and perhaps don't even want to separate from Somalia, and essentially is giving them a red light, or a green light rather, to stir up trouble and to destabilize parts of Somaliland.
And what would be the response if that is indeed what the president is talking about here? Would the Ethiopians, for example, step in to defend or to assist in any defense by Somaliland, which may then want to take on or respond to the actions of those groups who would be following up on the words of the president, if indeed that's what he means?
Well, that's unknown as yet. For the moment, Somaliland hasn't been destabilized by this announcement. There have been some high-profile resignations from the cabinet by ministers who object to the relationship with Ethiopia. And there are parts of Somaliland in the eastern part of the territory that have been disputed for many years and have been unstable for some time. So that continues to be a challenge. But there isn't a significant rebellion or insurgency in Somaliland as yet, and there's probably no need for the time being for Ethiopia to assist militarily. The real question is whether Ethiopia is going to follow through on this initial MOU and actually recognize Somaliland, or whether this is a commitment that is on paper only and is not yet backed up with the full political commitment of Addis Ababa.
Good to speak to you, Matt Braddon. Thank you so much for talking to us about the situation in Somalia and Somaliland, also including Ethiopia.